Hello, welcome back to RC Video Reviews. Today we're taking a look at the build review on the Dynam Smoove. There's so much airplane here, I'm almost at a loss for words. Almost. Alright guys, I want to talk a little bit about the build process for this plane, and I need to spend a little time trying to convey a sense of scale. So I'm just going to apologize right up front for the crap thumbnails. I've done my best trying to get a picture of this thing all inclusive, and I think the only way I'm going to be able to do it is on a bright sunny day outside where I can step away from the plane a little bit because it's just massive. It's so challenging to put it into words or to give you an idea using cameras just how big this plane is without being able to step away from it. It is massive. And you might be saying, John, why are you making such a big deal? Yeah, great, it's a big plane. Well, let me tell you why. I've learned over the last few months that as I've flown my Chaos more, and that's a 60-inch wingspan and it's heavy, that I love it. I can take that plane out in wind and I can fly it and it just settles into the wind. It doesn't mind as much. And visibility is fantastic. You can fly the plane high, you can fly it kind of far away, and you get a perfectly good usable view of the aircraft. So if you think about it in those terms, it really kind of opens up your flight envelope. You can fly in weather that's less than favorable for small foamies, you can fly it a little farther away, and it's stable as a freaking rock. And this plane is bigger. It's bigger. And on top of that, it's a straight up pattern plane. And I've also noticed, I'm not sure if it's a marketing thing or not, but they call this the Smoove 3D. But make no mistake, this is a pattern plane, and you can tell just by looking at the fuselage. I mean, that's an F3A plane. And it shares design language with other high-end pattern planes. With all that said, I just wanted to explain to you why I keep making such a big deal about the size of this plane. And for the money that it's going for, remember, right now it's on sale, $275, but that also gets you the motor and a carbon fiber prop. So if you put those two together, that's $100 just by themselves. You're getting this plane for $175. You cannot beat that with a stick. And now that I've had a time to get into the build review, I'll give you an opportunity to share with you what I learned about the plane, and we'll wrap it up and get ready for the maiden. So on the build review, what I'll say is that this plane is not a beginner's plane. Because of the nature of a pattern plane being fully symmetrical, no dihedral, this is not a plane that a beginner should be flying anyway. But if you're an intermediate pilot, even if you're not interested in pattern flying, these pattern ships are spectacularly good sport planes. They're highly competent as sport planes if you just want to do that. So with that in mind, the reason I say it's not a beginner plane is because there's an added level of complexity with things like the servo horns. I'll do my best to handle the plane for you, but you got to understand this thing is massive, so I can't really flip it around the way I normally do with these smaller planes. Okay, the first thing I want to show you, and I'm just going to show you the one, but it's true for the aileron and the elevators, is they use servo horn extensions. So you have to screw these on to your servo arms, and what they do is they give you a crazy amount of throw, which is why I say I think that's one of the reasons they can get away with calling it a pattern or a 3D plane, is because look at the throw on that aileron. And by the way, look how big the aileron is. I mean, that's a huge control surface. So there's no surprise to me why the guys at Grayson were able to fly this like a 3D plane, more so even than a pattern plane. I just wanted to point out these servo arm extensions because I put my servos in for both the ailerons and the elevators without using these, and then I found them and thought, oh great, now I got to take it all apart. And I did, but you got to put those on if you want that full deflection. If you're just going to fly it in a pattern format, you probably don't need to do that. All right, the second thing I want to show you is that this plane uses, and it's so hard to handle this plane. It's huge. All right. Right, the next thing I want to show you is that this plane uses plastic hinges with a pin. Now the way I did this is they're slotted already, But what I did is I used my knife and I made a mark on both sides. I fitted everything in, dry fit it, and once I got the hinges where I wanted them, I took my knife and made marks on the aileron and the trailing edge of the wing, and then I recessed just a little bit. I just took my knife and just sliced the edge off on both sides of the slot on the trailing edge, and then on the aileron where it comes into that 45-degree peak, I just shaved off the peak. And then by doing that, it let me have an almost negligible gap. Okay, the book says to use CA on the hinges, but I didn't do that. I used epoxy, and I used a 30-minute epoxy. But here's the trick that I use. Normally when you put in these types of hinges, they'll say put some oil or Vaseline. Oil to me is very dangerous because if it's thin enough, you'll get it on the plastic surface, and if you do that, you have no hope of getting your epoxy to stick to the plastic hinge. The other thing you need to do, just like any other smooth surface, is take your knife and scratch it up, put a lot of marks in there. That gives that glue something to bite into. Now here's my pro tip for putting in these plastic hinges: chapstick. Now here's why I like chapstick. What you're trying to do is clog up the seam, the hinge seam where the two plastic pieces meet, to keep the epoxy from binding them together. Chapstick does a great job because it will not run. It doesn't run down the hinge. It's very convenient because it comes in a stick and you just rub the hinge with it. In fact, you know what? I'm going to go get it and show you. I'm going to do one. I've got one. I'm going to show you. Okay, so here's the hinge that you get. This is the style of hinge you get with this airplane. Now, you see that it's kind of like the hinge area where the two halves come together. Here's what you do with the chapstick. You just take your chapstick and just apply it right here on the exterior for that pin. Let's see if I can just do this so you can see it. Just like that. All the way around, and gum it up. Don't worry about gumming it up. But here's the cool part. See, it doesn't run. It stays put, and it won't leak down onto the plastic surface. And then after you've done that side, just coat it up real good, and then flip it over and do it again. There you go. And that's how I put my hinges on, and it works great. Just a little bit of chapstick, and now when you push this into the slot and the epoxy oozes out, you can wipe it down with denatured alcohol or rubbing alcohol to clear off the excess epoxy. And even if a little gets on that hinge line, as soon as the glue is set up, you just crack it and it moves, and that's it. It's over. It goes away, and this thing hangs freely. When I don't have my servos connected to this aileron or any of the other control surfaces, they just flop in the wind. I had absolutely no problem using epoxy and chapstick. One other little trick, and Dave kind of made sure to point this out when we were talking about these hinges: make sure when you glue these or get ready to glue them that you push that epoxy through these holes. So that gives the glue something to grab onto inside the hinge. So instead of just gluing to the surface, you're actually putting epoxy through those holes. So you get glue on the wood, on the bottom, on the top, and in those holes. And then when you put that in there, it all binds up and it makes a very positive seal. So I feel very strongly that those hinges are in there nice and tight. They're not going anywhere. You can see there I've got almost zero gap on my hinge line. The hinges are nice and recessed into both the trailing edge and the control surface, and it looks fantastic. Okay, now I do have some negative news I need to cover, and it's not a showstopper, but I need to make you aware of it because I encountered it and it slowed me down for a little bit. When you get the control rods for this plane, there are 4 of them. They're an M2 size with a 304 pitch. And you get the ball link connectors that go on, let me show you. And you get these screw-on ball link connectors that go onto that threaded rod. So here's the problem I had. One of my control rods didn't have threads on one end. One end had threads the way it's supposed to. The other end was just a shaft, just like a normal control rod, no threads. And obviously that's a problem because if you're going to use the ball links and you're using these servo extension horns and the control horns that come on the plane, they're bigger than most control rods that I even had in my stash. And I've got a lot of control rods in my stash. So you really kind of need to use the ball links because they have a hex head screw that goes through the ball link and the horn with a nut on the other side, and that prevents any slop in the movement on the servo. What I ended up doing is I got on Amazon and I found an M2 304 pitch set of threaded rods. Now here's the other part that's interesting. The threaded rods that come with the kit, they have a certain amount of thread on each end of a normal control rod. Well, the problem was that the control rods that came with the kit, when I threaded the ball links all the way on, they were still too long for this aileron. And the aileron stood, you know, it stood up proud like that. It didn't lay flat the way it's supposed to. So fortunately, because I bought threaded rods, I was able to cut them to length and screw my connectors on to the correct distance so that at neutral, these ailerons were flat. I don't think that because they missed a thread on a control rod, that's a systemic problem. It's just an error. It's just an error. Those things happen. The bigger issue to me was that the control rods they did give were too long, and you can't just simply cut an end off, because if you do, you lose your thread. Just be aware of that. There are more than one solution to this problem. I found fully threaded rods. I know there are options out there where you can get the brass rods that solder on, and you can do that. So there are alternatives, but be prepared. You might have to dive into your stash to cure little issues like that. Yours might be perfect. This is the first time I've heard this. I've never heard this before. I'm not sure that it's like a systemic problem in the Smoove kit. I've never read a complaint about that in all the other material I've read about this plane, so who knows. The next thing is that the rudder is a pull-pull system, and when I unwrapped my cable, I could have swore it was plastic, but it's not. It's steel, but it's sheathed in a plastic coating. It's strong and it works. All I can say about pull-pull, I'm not an expert. I've only done it twice. This is my second time doing a pull-pull system. So just make sure that everything is squared and centered before you start crimping stuff down. That's all I can say. I'm not an expert on that, on assembling pull-pull systems. Do your reading and make sure everything is square before you crimp that first connector. All right, I also need to tell you, you need a lot of servo extensions on this plane because the servos go in the horizontal stabilizer back there, and you've got to run extensions all the way up for 2 servos. You'll also need to thread them in yourself, so they don't, there's no help. So you have to have things like long control rods so you can fish your lines or your extensions all the way through from the back. So just be prepared for that. That's why these are the reasons I say this is not a beginner build, because beginners tend not to have all this stuff, right? You tend not to have extra screws for screwing servo extension arms onto servo arms. You tend not to have long connecting rods or push rods that you can use to fish wires through a fuselage. It takes a little bit of experience there, and that's why I say this is not a beginner's airplane. There's one other thing that I need to mention, and that is on the tail assembly. I'm not a huge fan of the way they do this, because here's the game plan. Right here, there's a screw that screws into the spar. So when you put the horizontal stabilizer on, it slides over the spar, and this screw screws into the spar. I'm not fundamentally opposed to that. I don't think that's a bad idea. But here's what I do struggle with. They didn't do the same thing on the front. So in order to affix this stabilizer to the plane, they want you to glue it right here. I haven't done it yet. I'm considering alternatives like putting in another spar up front, but the book solution is actually to glue it. Now normally I don't have a problem with that except for one issue. If you glue it and something goes wrong with this elevator servo, you're going to have to cut the elevator apart to get the servo out. That's a little bit of a problematic design. I think that could have been done better. I really do. I think they could have spent a little more time. Hell, they could have even made it like an aileron servo, where you get those little plates and you screw the servo to the plate, and then the plate screws into the pocket. That would have been acceptable. But for some reason they didn't do that. So if you glue that in, just be aware. You better hope your servos stay, because if they go south, you're going to be cutting this apart to remove and replace the servo. Just be aware of that. All right, I really don't have any commentary on weight and balance yet, because as you can see, I'm not finished. I'm almost finished. I just got the ESC today, and as I mentioned in the first look video, I went with the Phoenix Edge, and the reason I've done this, by the way, nice packaging. I got to give Phoenix real props. It's very cool, modern looking packaging. But the reason I did this, only one reason, and that's because I wanted the F3A braking profiles that are available on this ESC. Dave talked me into it. It's Dave's fault. I'm blaming Dave. It's all because of him. He said, you're going to want that on that big plane when it's going on that down line. You're going to want to be able to slow it down. And I think he's right. I do I do know that when I've watched pattern planes fly, I've always been really impressed how they take that downline and appear to almost stop. It's just amazing. I never knew how they do it. Now I've got an idea how they do that. That's why I bought this ESC. And what I will say about this thing, it looks impressive. I mean, I'm looking at it from the side. It's a substantial brick of an ESC for a 75 amp ESC. And it's got a programming interface plus the normal radio interface, a nice long heavy gauge. What are these? 12? 10 AWG wires to go to the ESC or the battery, and then a nice set of wires to the back. But here's a complaint. No bullet connectors and no shrink tubing. They really went cheap on the accessories with this. You know, for the money they charge for this thing, come on, Castle. Give us some bullet connectors and some heat shrink for Pete's sake. And you could throw in that USB linker too. We all know that's a profit center at $19. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to program this thing up. Dave's got a programmer. We're going to set it up with Dave's USB linker and get that braking profile set up correctly on this thing. But I will say that it does look like a high-end ESC. And the reason it says Lite has nothing to do with feature set. It has to do with weight, just in case you didn't know that. So this is the full-on Phoenix Edge ESC. It's got the full software functionality in the normal Castle Phoenix ESCs. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show you, and you've probably seen him sitting here like, John, what are you doing with all these motors? So this little guy, this is one of those 2212s. I think when I first bought these, it was for a slow stick. These are for little tiny park airplanes. This one's a 2212 1000. I've used stuff like this like on my son's Albatross and definitely on a slow stick. So a little tiny motor. Here's a 28 class motor, and I want to just size-wise, I want to show you. So here's a little 28 NTM 28 class motor. This is similar to what Dave sent me for the F22 Raptor. Very similar motor in size. Okay. Here's a Park 480. I think everybody's familiar with what these things are. This is an E-flite Park 480. This is a, what is this? I think it's like a 910 kV. This has been on and off. I can't even tell you how many planes. Good motor. Good motor. I like it. Now we're getting into the motors that I consider a little bit more substantial. So this is a 35 class motor. This is like the type you'd see in, say, like a 45-inch Ryan STA, for example, or maybe even a smaller Warbird, like a P-51 Mustang, like a 40-inch P-51. That's the kind of thing you'll see in these types of planes. Here's a 37 class Detram. This is what they put in things like the Waco, the Corsair, the this is a 500 kV. This is a 3720. So this would be the Focke-Wulf FW190. This is a size motor that would go in there. And look, look at the size differences, right? This is a 35, 37. Now we're getting into the big stuff. I just uploaded a video on the Tower Hobbies Uproar, and I put in a Tomcat G32 on that plane, and this is the motor that I replaced with that Tomcat. This is the G-Force. This is the G-Force G32. This is a 32 class motor, okay? Now, look at this thing. This is why I say I'm almost speechless. I mean, look at the size of this thing. It's a weapon. It's amazing. Okay, when I look inside, the windings look pretty good. I don't see any skipping inside when I look inside. The outside is a real nice color blue. It's like this brushed, I don't know what color that is. It's like it's just blue. It's like I don't know, is that navy? I don't know. Okay, but nice color blue, and it's a G601. This is I believe it's a 420 kV motor, and all I can tell you is, holy smokes, man, it's big. I mean, look at here. This is a 32 class, and look, it dwarfs that. It dwarfs. It makes it look tiny, and look what it does to these little. Look at that. I'm trying to give you perspective so you can understand I mean, this is what flies a 50-inch Corsair and a 50-inch Focke-Wulf FW190. Look at this thing. It's unbelievably big. So it's just massive. It's all kinds of power. Now, here comes the bad news, okay? You guys know on a motor like this, my first inclination is to stick it on that judge and run all kinds of tests and tell you what I think. Well, here's the problem. This thing makes over 5,000 grams of thrust, which is more than the judge can measure. It's 1,200 watts. I don't think the judge would have a problem with the 1,200 watts. but the 5,000 grams of thrust, that's a problem. I cannot put it on the judge. So I'm gonna do a field test like the old school way. I'm gonna put a field watt meter on it and test it with that. I really, really wanted to put it on the judge and give you the numbers, but I can't. It's gonna break my meter if I do that, so I just can't do it. But anyway, that's the motor that comes with the plane. How cool is that? This is what I'm talking about. You can't buy the, if you bought the E-Flite equivalent to this, you're looking at an E-Flite Power 60, and I'm sure you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling those motors are somewhere around 100 to 120 bucks. This one at BitGo sells for about $78 if you just buy it straight up. By the way, I'll have an affiliate link if you do want one of these motors just for the motor, for some other project you're working on. But yeah, about 78 bucks for this thing at BitGo Hobby if you buy it alone. And that's why I'm saying this plane is such a good deal, because $78 motor, just call it a $22 prop, right? Between the two, you're at 100 bucks. You're at 100 bucks. 22 bucks for the prop, 78 bucks for the motor, that's 100 bucks. So that means you get the plane for 175. And that's why I keep going on about this, is because I can't believe how much airplane you get for that money. And sure, there were some build issues. It wasn't perfect, but I have yet to find the perfect plane. The Vanquish is pretty close. The Vanquish is pretty close. But you pay a real premium for that thing too. Here's another thing I wanted to show you. Check this out. This is the prop. It's a 17. This is a 17 by 12 prop, all right? Look at the size of that thing. Now, in the past, I would have considered this. This is a 12 by 6, a reasonably large propeller. I mean, this goes on bigger planes. Like my Chaos flies a 12 by 6 prop. It's an XOR wooden prop, 12 by 6. Look at this thing. Look at the difference between the two. You see what I'm saying? This is why I keep going nuts about how big this thing is, because I know this thing is just going to be a blast to fly. And it reminds me a little bit of Dave's 2-meter Vanquish. Not quite that big, but man, it's one substantial airplane. I'm going to wrap up the video just by covering a couple fit and finish points. Right now, everything that I've touched on this plane has been straight and square. Ailerons straight as an arrow. The elevator and rudder weights and counterweights straight up and down, so the rudder, trailing edge of the rudder is perfectly in line with the horizontal or vertical stabilizer, and the counterweight on front is in perfect alignment with the vertical stabilizer as well, so no problems there. The horizontal stabilizer and elevators are perfectly flat and level, no problems there. All of the kit hardware worked really well. The only problem I had with the kit hardware was that on one of the hex bolts that goes through the control horn, I was tightening it and I tightened it too tight and snapped it. Fortunately, the kit had one spare, so I was in luck. I was able to use the spare. Otherwise, everything else in the kit hardware-wise was just fine. The only missing thing that I saw were the screws you need to screw the servo extensions onto the servo arms themselves. You need to make sure you have those. Other than that, everything else was there. And the plane so far has gone together without a hitch. So as you can see, wings are done, ailerons are done, horizontal stabs done, elevators done, rudders done. All that's left to do is get the ESC on the plane, get the motor on the plane. That's not going to take very long at all. Get the receiver on the plane, and I'll be using an S6R, not for stabilization purposes for F3A, but just because that's my default receiver at this point. And balance it, and that's it. Oh, the cowl. Oh, and I do have a spinner coming. So as you can see, I've got a few more knickknacks to do. I have been working diligently on the plane to get it ready, but I had to wait for parts. So I'll be wrapping the build up very soon, and boys, fellas, guys, gals, I cannot wait to get this plane in the air because I think it's absolutely going to be a blast. Oh, one other thing. I was looking at the prop test data for the G601, and it looks like I'm going to be using a 5-cell, not a 6-cell on this plane. So I'll run the watt meter test just to make sure, but it does look like a 5-cell 4000 instead of a 6-cell 5000. Anyway, that's all I've got on the build review. So far, it's gone together fine. I have had no significant issues. The one hang up I had was the control rods, but you know, that's just the nature of the beast. It's what you deal with from time to time on building these types of planes. But other than that, man, this thing has gone together real easy, real straight, real square. I just don't even know what else to tell you. I think personally that the value of this plane is strong. For the price that they're asking for it right now, given the fact that you get the motor and the prop, this is hard to beat. I will get this out flying just as soon as I possibly can. I hope you all enjoyed the content and my build review on the Dynam Smoove. If you did and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit the button, man. Join us. Hit the button, hit the notification bell. That way you know when new material hits the channel and you can follow along and see what's going on RC video reviews. And don't forget, guys, I've got t-shirts. I'll put links in the description. Go buy a t-shirt. They're cool. They're funny. They're kind of cool to wear at the field. I'm going to get a couple more myself. I've got 2 already. I'm going to buy some more. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. I appreciate having you around. I appreciate your interaction and your comments. Please keep it all coming. That's all I've got for tonight. Take it easy.